You are listening to the Pranzata Podcast. This is your host, Andrea Pranzatelli. This is episode number 123 on the Pranzata Podcast on YouTube. We have a new guest today. This is Kristina Kelley. Kristina Kelley is a Texas-born New York City stand-up comedian. She also happens to own a production company called Dumpster Fire Productions, which hosts a monthly comedy show. She has a very interesting and dynamic background, and I have a lot of questions prepared for her today that I think you guys are really going to enjoy. Before we get into it, please don't forget to hit subscribe. It is my mission to grow this channel this year, and your support would be incredibly helpful. Okay, so thank you so much for doing this, first of all, for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it. My first question for you: you said you wrote a pilot and you finished writing the pilot. If you can explain to the listeners what is the premise of the pilot, I mean, without giving out too much information at the same time, so you don't have to give away too much. But then my follow-up question to that is, what is the next step you have to take after completing writing a pilot? Do you contact Netflix? Like, I have no idea how it works. So I'm curious, like, how the whole process works.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking. Thank you for having me. So far, this is so professional. I got to stop doing this is the problem. I am showing my millennialism, very much so. Also, with the fact that I did not prepare for my hair. No, I got into stand-up comedy because I comedy raised me. TV raised me, stand-ups from the 90s raised me. And, despite anything else that's going on in your life, you always had like TV characters who last for a long time, and they sort of become like your chosen family. So I've always been very excited by TV. But I got into stand-up thinking it would help me write, more often, be more observational, be more present with things. And it really has. But TV writing is so much different. And I really, really enjoy it because now as I'm writing, I can categorize things. These are stand-up bits. These are TV bits. Every time I see a weird New Yorker, I write it down for a background scene. But in the pilot, the idea is it is an imagined experience. If I, as a young transplant here, I was a teacher in the South Bronx for about 11 years. I taught middle school and high school. And those were interesting and absurd and ridiculous and inequitable experiences that led to hilarity because of the terrible situations we were in. And the kids just made me funnier and funnier. So it is as if when I moved here, my unhomed LARPing uncle came here and never left.
I have to pause you for a second. What does LARPing mean? I feel like an idiot, but I don't know.
Very good question. LARPing, live action role playing. So when we were younger, we would do D&D, but we would also do the sword fights. We worked at the Ren Fair and would do choreographed weaponry with people.
Okay.
So he's a weirdo, and I love weirdos. I'm a comedian, so it works. But him and my grandmother have a tragic past, and our family is somewhat segmented across the country. And he used to always ask to come to visit me, and I used to always think if he visited, he may never leave. And what would that be like? Because I also wouldn't make him leave either. So this pilot is the imagined experience that one day a young teacher gets a phone call from their grandmother who bequeaths custody of their 45-year-old uncle to her. And before she hangs up the phone, it cuts to him making TikTok videos of his cross-country travels to get from Texas to New York. And then he forces his way in and doesn't leave. The pilot ends in a very cute way, and he becomes embedded in the New York community very, very quickly because we embrace all weirdos here. So it is a love story and a family story and a coming of age story where they both sort of teach each other to grow up because we never got that as children. So it's adorable and also sad, which when I wrote it, some people were like, I think this is a dramedy. And I was like, I think I'm too absurd for a dramedy.
What, and dramedy, is that drama/comedy combined? Is that what that
means?
Okay.
And so it would be there would be a more deep emotional connection to characters and It would just be like a deeper pull on the heartstrings than like 30 Rock maybe. Like there
Right.
are lighthearted moments where characters love
Yeah.
one another, but then, somebody falls from the ceiling onto a table filled with
Would
cake,
would Full House be considered a dramedy? Because I feel like that's comedy, but also is that
I think that's just a special kind of TV show from the 90s where it's
gotcha?
after school special meets, live studio audience.
Right. Okay, so now my follow-up question to this, that's amazing that you wrote a pilot. I can't even imagine. You must be have a lot of ideas brewing in your head to be able to do something like that. So kudos to you. What's the next step you have to take to now try to make this a reality? Do you contact TV networks? Do you put it out on YouTube? Like what happens next?
There's, especially since the pandemic, comedy has taken so many different forms. So there's so many paths that you can take now versus before. And then also that feels very overwhelming. So what I am doing is just trying to continue to write, continue to punch up the pilot, continue to do table reads and show it to people and get feedback. But I'm also trying to transition into storytelling a little more to meld those two into a one-woman show. So the idea would be a lot of the pieces and elements from the pilot can be told in the one woman show to show a performance piece that shows like a written narrative that allows people to sort of follow me on a journey that would mimic that of a TV show,
Got
like one
you.
episode of a television show. So I'm trying to pull pieces of each of them and use them as efficiently as possible, but bring in some new skills so that I can showcase and stretch other talents, I guess.
Gotcha. So your plan right now is to kind of do this during stand up, to use stand up stages to show your TV show. That's interesting. I've never heard of anybody doing that. Has anyone ever done that before? Or is this kind of like are you
Well,
one of the pioneers of this style of stand up?
I wish I could say I was a pioneer of anything. As a teacher, it is often said like all we do is take from other people and like make it new for our kids. So like
Right.
we just borrow and borrow and borrow. Essentially, a lot of people do kind of what I'm trying to do through like Edinburgh and things like that, like fringe festivals. So you'll
Gotcha.
find a lot of stand-up comedians who would do a one-person show
Gotcha.
to sort of transition into a different mode, but also stretch different muscles, meet different people. And storytelling is so different. And you are allowed to be a little more emotional. My girlfriend last night was like, ugh, storytelling. She was like, wait, is it still comedy? And I was like, for me, it is still comedy, but not
Yeah.
for everyone. And
Yeah.
so I think a lot of people do similar things. I'm not sure, people get very frustrated trying to combine them because they have
Right.
different pieces that go together at different rhythms.
Right.
And I am currently very frustrated in trying to do like my 1-2 punch stand up and then be like, let's pause for a second. I'm going to tell you a 6-minute story.
Yeah.
And it still has punchlines in it, but it definitely follows sort of a different vibe. So it's challenging for me. I don't think it is anything that is particularly groundbreaking, but I am hoping that I will be able to bring relatable things in crazy ways that help people see that we all go through. Life is always hard and it never stops being hard. It can only become more fun while it's hard.
Now that you
And
mention it,
so
I have seen not exactly what you're doing, but I've seen a few stand-up comedians that kind of I wish I knew their names. I'm the worst at this. The names don't come to mind. But I know there's this one stand-up comedian that he did a special that was half serious and half funny. Do you know who I'm talking about?
I don't, but I think I saw it as well.
Oh God, was it Neil Brennan? I don't remember exactly who it was, but it was very fascinating and very unique, very different. He it was half stand up and then half kind of like a monologue of his life story. So you get the sad, depressing life story. No one's laughing during it. It's very serious.
No
But
one's
then he
laughing.
cuts into the stand up. So you kind of get this dichotomy of here's why I'm funny and here's the funny stuff. And it was different. It was not a traditional stand up, but it was a stand up special at the same time. So I guess now that you mention that, and then I also think of Bo Burnham, he's kind of a similar way too. You know, he's a musical comedian, but he kind of splits it up between very serious subjects and very
Yeah.
hilarious subjects. So yeah, there I guess yeah, I'm thinking to myself, okay, like this is interesting, but I have seen comedians do stuff like this before. So yeah.
Mike Birbiglia does it too. I like him as a writer, and I like the style he takes with his one man shows, and I do go and support him. But his personal comedy is not my taste.
Yeah.
Like I'm not his audience. But I respect his ability to do very similar things that I'm trying to do. That he also, reports getting a lot of shit about from other stand-up comedians. Like, what are you doing over there? Let's go tell the jokes.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah.
I am excited. And there were lots of models of adjacent things and pieces that I could sort of borrow in hopes to spin it with a little woman and spin it with a little gay and, lift up some voices that aren't always heard. I mean, white voices, sure, but gay voices, less so.
So my next question for you, actually, you mentioned before that you were raised by TV. I can relate a lot to that, and not necessarily by TV, but I was raised by a single father who had to work a lot. And I actually feel like I'm a late bloomer that I didn't learn things that I should have learned from childhood till I was in my like late 20s and 30s. So to me, podcasting, listening to podcasts has been my parents. Like I'm like, "Oh, I should have learned that." Like I have these idols that I look up to and I'm like, "Oh, they're teaching me things that I never learned as a kid." So I can relate so much to that sentiment. So my question for you is, what are some TV shows that shaped the person you are today and actually taught you life lessons?
Yeah, Golden Girls.
Golden Girls.
If
Nice.
you need a life lesson, Golden Girls has covered it. I mean, and like if I think there was a supercut of all the times they said gay or lesbian, and this was however many years ago, what, 40
Yeah.
years ago, maybe?
Yeah.
But the Golden Girls, I have like a comfort shows that I've seen every episode of, and then I watch in the background and I kind of have memorized. And the Golden Girls is one of those. Early on, uh, I was a kid in the 90s. I like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and things like that. But my comedy shows, uh, in my formative, like young adult times were Arrested Development, 30 Rock, Parks and Rec, absurdist, familial, and, familial, define that however you want. Friends are family, especially
Yeah.
in the gay community. So it's, just weird family experiences and like relationships. The reason I like TV is because it's, character driven,
Yeah.
when movies are much more plot driven. And of course, there's
Right.
crossover and exceptions, but with TV, you get to live with the character for a long time, especially in America, because we never cancel anything when it should be canceled. But I enjoy the comfort of that. So Golden Girls is one of those because also it holds up. It shockingly holds up almost every time. So that's amazing. And some amazing, like, iconic comedians in that cast as well. That if I wanted to act, I would definitely mimic their careers as much as I could. Betty White, such a boss. But as I got older and like more depressed as a teacher because you get tired and you're not eating right and you see so many things that need help and there aren't resources for, like, what do I do when I go home? And I would put on, one of six shows. My Name is Earl is one that I think surprises people that I love so much. But it's just absurd. Everything is just absurd. So I like looking at life and picking out the eccentricities and sort of highlighting them and being like, this is weird. We all agree this is weird. Okay, great. We're all living the same weird life.
That's funny you
Um,
mentioned it's funny you mentioned that about the Golden Girls because I live in Philadelphia. I went to the thrift store a couple weeks ago and I found these Golden Girls pajama pants. If I had them like
Ness.
I would pull them out right now if I had them handy, but it would take too long. but I love them. They're so comfortable, and they're just pajama pants with these like huge like faces of the Golden Girls, and I think it says goal squad goals are on it or something like that.
Squad. That
And
is a squad goal.
yeah, I wear those. I don't even like, I feel like a fraud now because I don't know the show very well, but I just thought they were the coolest looking pants. So I'm gonna have to rewatch the show. I used to watch it when I was much younger, but it's been so long that I can't
Yeah.
really remember. It's my memory is kind of blank at this point with that, but I would like to get back into it because I do remember it being a very funny show. Yeah.
You can watch them in any order. That's the great thing about the Golden Girls is like
Yeah.
syndication was perfect for them because it really doesn't matter when you watch it. It's still a wonderful experience and you can
Yeah.
piece together the plot as you go because the important part is the characters and their relationship.
Are any of the cast still alive or did they all pass away?
Oh, I think they're all dead now.
Oh.
Yeah, big bummer.
Okay, so yeah, no, I relate a lot to what you said though about being raised by other things because I'm assuming you said you had a young mother. Was she a single mother too, or just busy, very busy?
Both on and off, all of the above. There's five of us girls.
Yeah.
My mom had me when she was 17.
Wow.
Um, so it was me and her for a little bit. Then the others, trickled in, and we all have different fathers. I have a bit where I call the two that share a father the true blood sisters, um, because we're all half bloods, the rest of us.
So,
Um,
so every
but
single one of you? There's not a single one of
yeah,
you in. Wow, that's cool.
except for the two
Yeah,
true bloods.
yeah,
And so but I still talk to their father. He's my chosen father.
yeah.
And so I still have been meaning to just put on paper that he adopted me, just as like, and he would cry so hard. He's a big Texan. He wears a big cowboy hat and chain smokes all the time, but he would cry immediately.
How long?
Uh,
How long did you live in Texas before you moved to New York?
I went to University of Texas after high school, so I was in Central Texas for most of my life. When I was 20, right after college, I joined a teacher program and I moved to New York City. There was a shortage of white, redheaded, gay women in the South Bronx, and those children really needed me. And then I got there and I thought, you needed someone. It may not have been this person, but I'm going to try real hard.
Okay. So actually, my next question is about teaching. So this is a good segue. So you taught middle school in the Bronx for 11 years. Wow. And now you actually train teachers, and you've been doing that for, I believe, 5 or 6 years. So that's amazing. You must be very skilled at this point. My question for you, are there any parallel skills from teaching that helped cross over into your stand up?
Every day, my girlfriend tells me I teachered comedy. And yeah, almost all of my skills are transferable, and I use some of my stand-up skills when I coach teachers. Luckily, I only taught middle school for 2 years. The rest of the time, I was with high schoolers, which I related to much more. Middle schoolers have a lot of feelings, so many feelings. And that's hard when you like shut off feelings when you were a child. And so like learning how to feel feelings with children, learning how to feel feelings was very hard for me. So moving to high school, but almost everything is transferable, like economy of language, choosing your words wisely to make sure that you can find a rhythm and you can engage people. Storytelling, I find very easy because I was a history teacher. So I actually had a student. I want to tell you his name because it's a perfect name, but he was a seventh grader who essentially embodied a 65-year-old Black woman, like the most wonderful grandmother you could possibly imagine in this tiny little boy. And he would like you could tell he was raised by his grandma, just the sweetest kid in the world. It's March. So I have been teaching this boy history since September. I say it's time for the state test. We got to get ready. And he looks at me panicked. And I was like, what's wrong? He was like, Miss, I really thought you were just telling us stories, like that you were like having dreams and then you would come back and you like tell us about your dreams. Everything you've told us really happened. And like you watched his mind explode. And then he like went through all the wars we had talked about. And he was like, oh no, these were real. And he was the sweetest. child in the world, but I just taught in a way that was almost like storytelling. With when you give children directions, you need to give them only the information that they need. And you need to give them the right information, because like compliance doesn't equal learning. They can listen to you, but that doesn't mean they're learning anything. And so choosing the right words to make somebody laugh or show somebody this is the quality of work we're looking for and this is how to do it are very similar skills. Trying to engage teenagers had prepared me for every audience I have ever been in front of. Some people have yelled and tried to heckle me, and I was like, I lost all my feelings in 2008. Like the children have prepared me, because children are ruthlessly funny, especially when they're in difficult circumstances like the ones we found ourselves in. And so managing people with respect, and like not managing what they're doing, but sort of guiding their experience is very similar in teaching as it is to stand up, because you're taking them with you somewhere, but you want them to do the work. You want them to connect, and you want them to engage and feel and interpret it however they see fit. Because, just because I think something is highly political one way, it can be interpreted completely differently. Or I might think something is benign and it might be harmful to another community. So, like, being able to read body language as well is a very transferable skill, and to know how people are feeling and processing what they're hearing and seeing. So I also can hear everybody's conversation in teacher mode. So I can hear people talking about me in the back of the club. And sometimes I do say, I can hear you. We are in the same room. Usually they're being nice, but I think it's funny when you go to a comedy show and you're like yelling at your friend, like, that was a good one. And I'm just like, that's very nice, but also we don't need to yell.
That's interesting. Going back to what you were saying about how to connect with the kids and not being, I don't know the exact words you use now, but like not being overly authoritative, I guess you could say, or I don't know if it's
Sure,
the right.
yeah.
I
Well,
like
they're
I was gonna say I'm thinking back to my middle school years. If my parents are listening, they could attest that I was a pretty difficult child when it came to school. I wasn't rebellious in the sense that I was like heckling or blurting things out, but I just didn't want to do anything. I didn't see the point. I came from a really difficult upbringing myself, where I was raised by a single father. When I say parents, I'm referring to my stepmom. She came into the picture later on, but I was, I was dealing with so many issues at home that none of this seemed relevant to me. All this seemed stupid. I was like, my mom just left the house and abandoned our family. Why the like should I do anything you're telling me? Like it and I remember I don't remember any of my teachers from middle school except for this one who was kind to me. And because he was kind to me and compassionate to me, rather than looking at me like a piece of garbage, like, oh, this kid's bad, I remember him. Like, I remember his name. I remember what he looked like. And I remember actually participating in his class. And it was interesting how him just being kind to me made me want to participate. But everything else, I mean, I was rough. I would in the mornings when the bus came, I would pretend to go to the bus. And then when my dad went to work, I would just go back home. And then when he caught me doing that, he would drive me to school. And then he would drop me off. And then when I saw his car leave, I would walk like 2 hours back home. I did not want to go to school. And it was just really hard to like, I was just like, my life is difficult. Like what do why should I do any of this? Like it was kind of that thing. So it's interesting. I'm sure you probably would have known how to connect with me, I bet, if you were my teacher.
I try, and I've had some years are better than others.
Yeah.
I do. My favorite kids are the ones I dislike the first day, because they're difficult, and I love the kids who are kiss asses the first day, and then within a week that has switched completely, because
Yeah.
like the difficult children are clever in being difficult, and they're funny, and they are logical, and you can reason with them, because as you're saying, like, you didn't see the point, and there are a lot of kids, most of my kids, who there was no reason for them to see the point. Like many people who looked like me had come through positions in their lives where they said they were going to be there and then they were no longer there. And so you're starting from a place where you have to earn like the relationship and
Yeah.
hopefully the respect. And, you know, sometimes that's easier than other times. But what I've found is just like trying to remember we are all humans with lives is
Yeah.
the best thing that you can do, and being understanding with children. And then I call my teachers children, even though most of them are older than me. I guess not anymore, but they used to be. um it's like we have to meet you wherever you are because you are our student, and so it is our responsibility to come to you how you came to us. And so if that means first you have to get to know somebody, kids learn from people they don't like, but it's harder.
Yeah.
Um,
I
it's
was
like, yeah,
sorry to interrupt you. I just thought of something too. There was a polar extreme teacher that his method actually worked for me too. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but for where I was at the time, it worked for me. Polar opposite of the other teacher. He didn't necessarily look at me like a bad kid, but he kind of challenged me in an aggressive way. I think he actually called me a little it was my chemistry teacher, and he was like, "Oh, you're another one of these little that just won't get it." And it pulled out my competitive streak. I was failing chemistry, and by the end of the year I got I got A's in the chemistry test, and it was just to prove to him I wasn't a little. So oddly enough, it was like I could only function in these two extremes. Like either you have to be wildly compassionate or just like abusive or a total, because then it brings out my competitive side. I'm like, I'll show you I'm not an idiot type of thing. But anything indifferent and lack of passion in between was like, this is a waste of my life. You know, I remember that
yeah.
feeling. Yeah.
I went complete opposite of you as a child. How many siblings do you have?
Well, at this time I only had two, but when now I have three. But at the time I only
Okay.
had two. Yeah.
There were just so
Two,
many
I'm sorry,
people.
two, let me correct that. Two including me. So I only had one sibling.
Okay.
I have a little brother, but he came later in the picture.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there were, for the most part, there were four of us
Yeah.
while I was in middle school and high school. And, you know, my mom wasn't around a lot. Like she lived with us, but, you know, we may not check in every week. And my stepfather, you know, was terribly unhappy at the time. I love the man and he has grown a lot, but he was terribly unhappy. So we were all terribly unhappy. Uh, and I wasn't really getting attention. So the original thought of my one woman show was like, it was all for love. Because I've done a lot of wild things with people in my life because I wanted to be loved and like missed lots of red flags. And so that's what I found at school. Like, because of my teachers, I joined every club and I was able to like travel and compete and learn instruments and do sports and get into college and apply. And I used to leave my acceptance letters on like the couch and hope that somebody would see them. And of course, nobody would. And so it was just it was an easier way to throw myself into things when I was done. And so that's kind of what I did with comedy when I got sad at my current job. You know, I work for the government, so it's very bureaucratic. So sometimes things are hard to change, even when you know they should be changed. And everybody agrees they should be changed, but it's just not that easy. There are laws, there are money, there are, you know, all sorts of things. And so I had reached a moment where I had gotten pretty sad. And so I just turned around and like over scheduled comedy. I was doing like 30 shows a month when I did not have the material to do 30 shows a month. I was doing 300 open mics in the first year that I did it. I was just writing new material. I didn't want to go to the same open mic with the same jokes ever, which now, like thinking about those things is absurd. And so there has to be a balance, but sometimes, like, I know that I can teacher my way into a path, and that's kind of like my production company. I have my friends who help me produce, and I just sort of organize us and do the steps, and like I've teachered it. And sometimes I feel bad about that. And sometimes I'm like, this is very useful though. Like we have an organized action plan that allows us all to sort of reach our goals. But sometimes I want to reach goals more intensely than other people. Uh,
Yeah, it's interesting how a lot of these things are kind of like our coping mechanisms for survival. even if they started out as that, they end up serving us later in life, you know?
Yeah. And so now I'm trying to get better at learning all the people I work with because my co-producers are amazing. They're lovely. They do amazing work. They work very, very hard. But everybody in comedy, when you want to write with me, all of those people, it's like you begin to invest and then you realize, oh, we don't have the same goals. And that's not a problem. That just means we're going to be moving at different speeds.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that becomes challenging. And so teaching has kind of helped me with that is so I can like take a step back. And now in my elder age, I just keep being very vulnerable. I think it creeps younger people out. But I don't know what else to do. So like last night I did storytelling, like my first storytelling bit all together. So I met the storytellers, and of course they were weirdos, which I loved. But I felt really uncomfortable. I don't go to bars because I'm sober, and I don't really like bars because I can't hear people. But I popped in and I was going to stay for 5 minutes and just say hello. And so I did so, and I left, and I was like, Kristina, go back, talk to the people, be polite. Let's, get to know people. Let's benefit from this experience. So I had a whole pep talk. I went back in, then I told them I had a whole pep talk. And then I talked myself back into being here, and they were like, oh, precious. And you know how kids are like, I love that for you. It was that sort of thing. So I also know that it is insulting. However, I've been just trying to be excessively vulnerable in expressing like my thankfulness and like my struggles through like anxiety and moments that I don't feel prepared for, but I'm going to try really, really hard.
I mean, I think that's a great thing to express vulnerability in front of your students. I think that might have been one of the reasons why in school I didn't care because it felt so uniform and it felt so, like you said, it's a government job, so there's these standards you have to follow. I actually used to teach Spanish at a school for very briefly, and I ended up quitting because I couldn't stand that part of it. I mean, I'm sure you're aware of this. I don't know how it is in New York City, but I was in New Jersey at the time. They were giving me a certain amount of there was a certain amount of paperwork I had to fill out, but they were only paying me for a certain amount of time. And the amount of
Yeah.
paperwork I had to do
Does
was
not equal the time.
does not equal the time. So I would do dog paperwork. And when they would complain, you didn't fill out this, you didn't fill out that, I was like, I'm not getting paid to do it. So therefore, I'm not doing it. And so it's funny. I still have that attitude in life now, like that I did as a middle schooler. It's kind of just like part of my personality at this point. I just refuse to do things that don't make any sense to me. So for me, I have my own business now because I'm like, I can't work with other people. Like I just can't. I won't do it. I can't do anything I don't want to do. So it serves me better to work for myself. I do work part time 1 day a week at another spot just to kind of like socialize a little bit because working by yourself, you don't get to socialize as much. But
Sometimes I yell,
yeah.
like when I haven't spoken to somebody in a while, I'm like, hello.
Um, okay, I do have a question though about you going back to something you said about you're sober. I did include a question about that on here. So funny, my last podcast guest was also a sober comedian too, so it's like a trend on the podcast this week, I guess. So my question for you is, are you sober out of necessity that you had an addiction? And I'm sorry if this is, you don't have to answer the question if it's too
Yeah, of
personal,
course.
but was this an addiction you were struggling with, or was it more of a personal choice? And how did you get sober? Did you use like a 12-step method or just did it by yourself?
I don't really talk about my sobriety at all. I recently started doing some alcoholic bits on stage, and it felt good. Um, so nobody's ever asked me this question. Um, oh, it was necessity. It was not court ordered necessity. But it was life ordered necessity. It got to the point where like there was no way to keep the alcohol inside my body.
Right.
And so at that point, you have a very big problem because if the pattern is like, get drunk, like if you're on the weekend and then you stay drunk until Sunday night, you aren't hungover, little things like that. Like when somebody hands you a bottle of beer and they say, "Do you want a glass?" You say, "It's already in a glass." Like it's like you're an alcoholic. And so I didn't know what to do. I went to a clinic that was like offered some sort of alcohol suppressing desire pill of some kind, which I didn't take because I was lying about not drinking. And so that is dangerous, apparently. So, I went through some other things. I went to some AA meetings. AA meetings were difficult for me because of the God of it all. And I struggled with that. I struggled with the ones in churches and things like that. I did find a wonderful group of people, and that was easier for me because I was also able to relate to them, but it wasn't about God. It was more of like self ownership, and we didn't do
sorry to
12
interrupt.
steps. Yeah.
Just to clarify, they were a branch of the 12-step program, but they kind of did their own thing. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
So like they're listed with all of the AA groups, and people did work through the steps, and there were sponsors, but like I never got a sponsor, nor did anyone offer to sponsor me. But it was a problem. I didn't want that. Some people shared their numbers. I did share on my 1 year like people do. But I left after that. It had been a year. Um, I was drinking for lots and lots and lots and lots of reasons. Many of them were understandable, and then put all together, it's just a bunch of excuses. And so that was easier for me to see. And once I started comedy not long after being sober, and I've always been very thankful that I did it in that order. While it's difficult to relate to people, I just started to learn that like there's a 2 drink situation happening. Once everybody has had 2 drinks, it's okay to excuse myself because they won't remember the conversation and I'll just be frustrated. So, there's different rules I employ to sort of protect my own sanity, because everybody is drinking so much in comedy and in the audience. And I was so good at drinking, Andrea. I can't tell you how good at drinking I was. It was a skill. Like in Russia, they were proud of me for how much vodka I could drink. It was amazing. I was so good at it. And it's hard to retire from something you're so good at. But I eventually, jokes aside, it was very difficult. I was also very thankful I was sober during the pandemic because I probably would have died. If I were allowed to drink every day, all day.
All by yourself, even if you didn't
Yeah.
have any. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And my dog died then. My best friend died then. Like
Mhm.
I couldn't be more thankful to have been sober. I couldn't be more thankful to be sober through comedy. Because now there's not a bunch of other things getting in the way.
Right.
Um, Including, my own turmoil that's like exasperated by
Yeah.
alcohol. It's like not eating. Of course I'm cranky. I haven't eaten all day. Of course I'm an asshole. I've been drinking for 4 days. So it was similar. What about you?
So I'm sober right now, just sort of out of choice, not out of I don't know. I guess when I was younger, there were some signs that I could be an alcoholic because I remember I was able to stop by myself without a 12-step program. So that's why I'm like, okay, maybe I wasn't an alcoholic necessarily. But I remember when I was very young, I started going to bars when I was like 19 because I had a fake ID. So it kind of just creeped on me really fast that I found myself drinking like an entire bottle of wine by myself when I was like 20 years old. And I'm like, okay, I think
Yeah.
I'm developing a problem. So I was able to stop it by myself when I was pretty young. But I do have experience with the 12-step program because they have 12-step programs for different things that are not for alcohol. So I go for it's called SLAA, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. I'm not necessarily a sex addict, it's not that, but I've had issues in my relationships. Like I've had a very unstable pattern of relationships in my life, romantic relationships specifically.
Sure.
So they have eaters anonymous, they have gamblings anonymous, and this was like kind of an interesting thing that fit in with me. So it's interesting that you said before about how you're indifferent to the program a little bit because of the God stuff. I found it to be difficult for me in some ways. I almost dropped out of the program actually at one point. I think when I'm actually in it right now. I'm in step 8. In step 6, I almost dropped out, and I do have a sponsor, and she kind of was like, give it some time. I took a month break, and I came back and I was like, all right, if I've already made it to step 6, I might as well just stay at this point just to see what happens, even as an experiment at this point. But I do like the program, but there definitely were some things for me that I found that weren't useful. I, I mean, I feel like part of the tradition is you're not supposed to talk about it. They say that in the meetings, like don't talk about this on the media. So I don't want to, I guess, say too much or give out too much information. But I did find that there was a cult like vibe in there at times. I don't know if you feel that way as well. It was that your
I
experience
think
too?
anything grounded in the belief in a higher power could become cult-like depending on the group that you're with.
Yeah.
Because it's like-minded thinking, right? And so that can
Yeah.
get away from you. It's like every time you watch a cult documentary, the first 5 minutes, you're like, I can do that. That sounds good. And then
Yeah.
immediately we're to raping and murdering, you know what I mean? And like robbing
So
and so it's such a quick turnaround that I feel like everything is pre-cult. And it
yeah,
just matters like the powder keg that it's in because it's just like-minded thinking, right? And
that's
like
what,
the
so
ability
that's
to
what
manipulate.
That's exactly what it was. So around the time that I was in step 6, I was watching a bunch of cult documentaries and I saw the relationship. I'm like, wait a second. There's some similarities here. And I'm not kidding. This isn't just it's in my head because I saw these cult documentaries. I was like, wait a second. And a lot of it for me was the repetitive phrases. Like they have repetitive phrases that they say, and then
Yeah.
it started to freak me out because it was like this program is working for people, but now they're just kind of becoming addicted to the program. And for me, I was like, okay, I'm still in the program, but I want to be mindful to never become that. Like I still want to have a little bit of my own independence and to not have to, because and that was another thing. A lot of the people, they keep going back there for years and years.
For
Some of them,
50 years.
and I'm like, that's not, to me, I mean, I guess it's a better alternative than being drunk all the time, but there might be a better way where you can have your independence and learn how to function as an adult without having to do this for the rest of your life. So I feel like if
Well,
you, yeah, go ahead.
it's like sorry, it's like talk therapy. I am not a believer that talk therapy is forever for everyone.
Yeah,
Like I believe that it is very useful for most people, but
right.
it really depends on where you are in your life, whether you're open to it. Like
Yeah,
you can go to therapy, but if you're not
yeah,
actually like I have been a very difficult patient in therapy, like
yeah,
closed off, oppositional, not wanting to do this, not wanting to answer the questions, thinking that I know more about myself than they know about, therapy, whatever stubborn thing it is. And I've had other times when I've been very open to it and it's helped, and I only needed it for a short amount of time. Like I needed to learn a skill, or I needed
yeah,
somebody who was indifferent to give me, like, to just sort of repeat it back to me.
yeah,
But becoming reliant on something forever
yeah,
seems like when do I have the skills to do this on my own?
yeah,
And so I've actually had weird like dates with people who don't want to talk to me after they know how I was in AA. Because like they're okay with the AA part because then they're like fellowship time. And then I'm just like, no, it wasn't that kind of AA experience. And people find it like really disrespectful to what AA is supposed to be. Because, like I said, I didn't work through steps, I didn't have a sponsor. I went and I used it as like a group therapy session. And then if I needed them, I called. If they needed me, they called. And it was like community. So the interpretation of what I went through seems to offend a lot of people who are in AA, like religiously, and I guess religiously maybe is not the right word, pun intended, but like who attend it regularly and really live by it. I think a lot of it is logical and a lot of it is helpful. And then there's other things I just didn't use because they didn't land with me. And as a teacher, I think that's okay. As an AA person, I don't think it's okay. And as a cult person, it definitely wouldn't be okay.
I think the way you're doing it is exactly how I think it should. I mean, I don't want to say exactly how it should be done because, again, like I said, to me, it's not the best method to just blindly follow this thing and do every single step according to what your sponsor says. But if that's the only alternative to being an alcoholic, maybe some people need that. Maybe some people just
Yes.
need that kind of structure and that's what works for them. But I also think people like you who and this is where I have an issue with the program when people get too rigid about how you do it. I think people like you who don't work that way and need to be able to have some discernment and some
Yeah.
autonomy over what makes sense to them. In SLA, I don't know if they do this in Alcoholics Anonymous, but in SLAA, in the beginning of the meeting, they say, take what works and leave the rest. So I think that helped me to continue doing the program because I was like, all right, if I hate something, I don't have to do it. I can take what works
Yeah.
for me. But as long as I can keep that autonomy in the program, it does work for me. So I'm not offended at all by the way you do it. I think that's in my opinion, a better way to do it because then you learn how to take what works for you from the program, but also be able to trust your own intuition about what works for you in your personal life, you know?
Which is what somebody should have done with you in middle school.
Yeah.
And sort of just been like, look, if this doesn't make sense to you, like, let's talk it out. Let's figure out what does, because
Yeah.
that's the type of teaching that is, I guess, somewhat newer because we didn't really go through education with differentiated instruction that was tailored to each student's, data.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
read like chapters in the book and then we took the test and then, everybody was left behind
Yeah.
if they didn't learn in that way. And so, yeah, AA translates to comedy, translates to teaching.
School. It changes it. Now that you mentioned that, like I think when I was in middle school, school just looked like a cult to me too. It was like what it was like everybody's
And
getting
some of them feel like it too. Is if everybody, I have been to schools actually where, and this is kind of what I mean by like controlling bodies. Like, I don't need you to be sitting in a certain way to hear me.
yeah.
Like, that's not comfortable for everyone, but I see it places where people say position A, position B, and like the kids get up and move out of the room that way.
Yeah.
And you're just like, oh, nobody's smiling and everybody looks really sad. And they seem to have longer hours. And then, you go back to the school that has less resources, but more love, and much more need.
Yeah.
And, creating like a drill environment is not useful. It's also disrespectful because that is prison adjacent. And the schools are already a pipeline to prisons for students in our country who are traditionally underserved. And so ensuring that people have the ability to interact with and like feel what they're feeling and
Yeah.
come to where they are still carrying everything from their life and then finding importance in smaller places. Those are life lessons and skills.
Yeah.
Like, even though things are awful, I can figure out how to find a bright spot. And that's what like comedy is to me. It's like when it's the worst, I remember the funniest things that we've ever done. Or, I roast somebody when we're crying, which usually gets me in trouble with my girlfriend all the time. I gotta stop. But it's a defense mechanism that I've been able to stop using as a defense mechanism and start using as like a tool to hopefully be what TV and stand up was to me when I was younger. Like
Right.
a voice that's relatable. And I mean, I'm relatable to a very niche audience, but relatable and, just sort of pushing the lens closer to what is real by showing how crazy it is.
Right. Cool. All right. So I have two more questions for you. I don't want to hold you hostage because we're hitting
I
about
took
the
the day
hour
off.
mark. Oh, you did? Nice.
It's my best friend's birthday, so I always take my best friend and my girlfriend's birthdays off in case. And of course, they never plan anything with me. So
So
here we are.
now you just have a free day. Okay, I have two more questions. I always like to throw some philosophical questions on here. Some of them are going to be so random. Some of them are just random things on my mind that I want to go over with another human being. The next one is I'm trying to become a more confident human being because I was a very shy person growing up and I'm trying to figure out how to become more confident as an adult. How do you know and I don't understand this. How do you know the line between confidence and arrogance? Like where's that line? Have you ever thought about that? And what are some signs to you that okay, this is confidence and this is arrogance?
It's a good question. And in trying to find like my stage persona, I was really toying with, I am a lesbian and I am somebody who was raised with like sports and men and things like that. So sometimes I am intense in a way that can come off as arrogant. And so I try really hard to balance them. What I have found is it is making sure that I'm not mean-hearted. And I think that was the balance. And I learned that in my industry room at Broadway Comedy Club, and an audition they do here. And I had a joke about my girlfriend, and she loved it, but the punchline was you can't make a wife out of a hoe because that song was popular then. And it was mean-hearted. And the older people in the audience really got irritated and then started to interpret everything after that as negative. It didn't matter that none of it was negative. It slanted that way now because I had sort of tainted the experience. So I could still make the same joke now. I just know how to put something in front of it to make people okay with me being a little more arrogant, or a little more cocky than maybe some people are comfortable with. But I find as long as you stay in a positive leaning, lighthearted way, like my comedy is very filthy and I'm very mean to like myself, but not everyone else. And so like I just try and find the better moments. And so that helps because then like I have said things which I used to do in front of kids, which worked in front of kids, which is like, look at me. I mean, come on. Audiences do not like that at all, especially Brooklyn ones. Real weird. So you start to learn, I guess, how to sort of ingratiate yourself first. So then they kind of trust that you're going to end in a safe place.
Right.
And so that's like my stage reasoning. I'm not saying I'm good at it and I don't always get better. It helps that I'm not really arrogant in real life. But I am very intense. So it kind of just I say things very short, you know what I mean? I just come out with a clipboard and I'm ready so people take it as that is what I'm saying is the truth. And I always have to say like, this is what I think. I don't know if this is right. And then that helps. But in my regular life, God, I need some more confidence.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to
Stage, I
figure.
don't have a problem.
I'm trying to figure out the balance or like how to do it right because I've always been more of the people pleaser type growing up. And like funny, like when I was saying back to my middle school years when I was rebellious, it was kind of a silent rebellion. It's not like I was out, I would just sneak out of class quietly. And if I got caught, I was like really shameful and I would like tear up and start crying. So I was very sensitive, but I still wanted to do what I wanted to do. So like I'm like trying to figure out, I'm like, is that I don't even know what I am, like because I'm like kind of both. I'm like very sensitive and soft, but also very firm at the same time. So I'm like trying to be more outward with my inner thoughts. And I'm like all the time, I'm like, am I going to offend this person? Am I going to hurt this person? Am I going to hurt this person's
Oh my
feelings?
God.
So then I like kind of lean more into dominance. And then if I lean more into dominance, I'm like,
Yep.
well, now am I being arrogant? And it's just like a constant battle of trying to figure out. But I like what you said. It's like as long as you know what your heart's intention is behind what you say and do, that makes a difference. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. Like, I'm really proud that we have a monthly show at Stonewall. Like, for a young Texan gay, actually knowing what Stonewall was, like, and it was, something that was very important to me when I was younger. I'm very proud of it. But when people ask me, like, "Oh, you produced a show? Where's the show?" I'm like, "Oh, it's just a monthly at Stonewall." And then I like walk away, and they're like, "That's really cool." And I'm like, "Yeah, it's fine. It's a lot of work. It's not a big deal." And so, people will be like, "You wrote a pilot. Oh my God." I'm like, "Yeah, it's fine." And then I turn around and in my head, I am a big sister and a teacher. So I'm very opinionated and intense and sure about what I want. But I've kind of been practicing in the last 10 to 15 years to make space for other people, and sort of take a step back and maybe not immediately solve problems. I'm kind of, traditionally the way people would think a masculine person would be is like you tell them a problem and then they offer you a solution. And it's hard to untrain myself because as the oldest of five with the parents not around, like I had to become somebody who always had a million solutions and backup plans ready. And it was, if I didn't have it ready, we wouldn't eat or we wouldn't have electricity. And so it's like turning brain mapping and things, our brains, yours and mine, right? Because of our functioning as children are now always functioning at this like trauma level of releasing chemicals. And so when we have a shorter fuse or we close off faster, it's because we're already starting from this as like a natural stasis and other people are calm and like they start here because their brain releasing these like action chemicals or flight chemicals isn't their status quo. And so learning that this is where I'm always coming from, was really, really helpful. And like trying to make space for, and I don't mean to call them normals, but the other people in the world, the normals. And when I still to this day, like last night, I told you I met new people. I get very anxious about meeting new people. I get anxious in groups larger than two. And so I just kept saying like, hello, strangers. I am not good at meeting strangers. Like I asked somebody to follow me on Instagram, not follow me, but let me follow her on Instagram. And she was like, my name's Becca. And I was like, I'm so sorry. I'm bad at meeting new people. I was trying to be friendly. And so, I went home. I was like, Kristina, why would you say that? Like, why did you tell that story? Why? And then now I'm trying to be okay with it. Like, who cares? I may never actually see those people again. And if they didn't like me, then they're not picking up what I'm putting down. And that's okay. There are tens of thousands of other people within like a 2-block radius of me. Not everybody has to be my cup of tea and vice versa. But God, is it hard to come from people pleasing to like learning to take care of yourself
What's been
first.
going back to something you said before about learning how to not give advice and just listen. I'm the same way. Because I'm exactly like you said that my brain's always I'm an anxious person, which I find is actually a gift. Like it's people are like, I
Oh
have
yeah.
anxiety, I need medication. I'm like, no, my anxiety has solved problems all the time. But like you said, because it seems like we're both wired in that anxious state, we want to solve the problems quickly. What's been helping me to not throw that on people is to tell myself I don't want to rob from them the opportunity to solve their own problems, because I think a
Yeah.
lot of times when people are introducing their stressors to you, they're trying to solve it on their own, and it's like their first step of talking through it. Like they just kind of want to talk it through with somebody. So now rather than being like, oh, I've done this before, you got to do this, I'm just like, okay, if they ask me a specific question, I'll answer it. But if they don't ask me for any advice and they just want to talk, I'm just going to let them talk. Like that's what I do now. But it's something I had to learn. It's not something I always did,
Oh,
you know?
I get in trouble with my girlfriend and my best friend a lot because like I don't ask basic questions because in my mind if somebody wants to tell me about their day, they will and I will listen. If somebody wants to share something with me, they will. And what I have found is that other people want to be asked because I don't wait for people to ask. I just share what I want to share when I want to share it. And I assume that other people operate that way. And my friends are like, well, you didn't ask me how I was. And I was like, well, we had been talking all day. Like your mood seemed fine.
Yeah.
I, I didn't mean to not ask you, or people are like, you don't want to talk through that anymore. I'm like, I already solved it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to talk through it. And then, then do you find it hard to listen to people because you are solving in your head? Like sometimes I can't get to the end of what they're doing because I'm going.
I agree. Yeah, I do that too, where I'm like, I feel like I've learned I'm not the greatest listener. Being a podcaster, I mean, this is episode 123, has taught me how to become a better listener, because I wouldn't be able to do this if I kept interrupting. I still sometimes interrupt, but I try to only do it when it makes sense. Now, like, okay, I got to clarify this type of thing. But I'm the same way. Because I have this attention issue when I'm even reading books. Like I'll be reading a book, and if one sentence sparks another thought, I'll like, oh, what is
Yep,
that? What is
done.
that? What's that word mean? Let me go on Wikipedia and find that. And like this whole side trail just to get to the what is the etymology of this word? You know what I mean? So my brain just goes in another direction quickly. So yeah, it's really hard for me to just sit there and like hear somebody's whole story out, but I'm definitely getting better at it, you know?
Yeah, practicing very hard. When I tell my girlfriend I'm practicing, she's like, "You shouldn't have to practice. You should just be able to do it. This isn't hard." And it's like I understand it feels not hard, but it's not. It isn't because I don't care for or love the people I'm listening to.
Yeah.
I just don't know. I guess I don't understand how to work my own brain, which is super unfortunate.
Yeah. I have one more question for you. This is another philosophical type question. Do you believe human beings have any control to shaping the outcome of their own destiny, or do you feel it's all chance and luck?
I don't know. I think I've gone through this many times in my life and changed what I thought. When I was younger and more uh romantic, I guess I would believe that hard work would work, but at the end of the day I believe there was also a predestiny, and so I kind of still venture between both of those. As like a poor kid, I love to believe that hard work is all you need to get the things that you want, but being in New York, I have learned that hard work is maybe only 25% of it. And the rest of it is a lot of stuff you can't really control, having a network that was embedded in your life and things like that. I have 3 master's degrees in education, and I haven't been allowed to use any of them because every time I get a principal like last interview, or a superintendent last interview, they tell me, well, this man has been here for 16 years. And I say things like, I understand if they're not detrimental to the school community, that would be crazy to bring me in. I am a white lady. Like, we do need to be realistic about the optics of this for the school community. And so I've always been very understanding, but of like my role and where I might be. But it was hard to sort of say my education life is where it is, and that is as far as it will go. And that now I'm focusing on comedy as like what I would like to take over the way I pay rent. And that was very difficult because I invested so much time and energy in it. But it, while I think it's both, I mean, I think I was supposed to come to New York, which means I was supposed to date my first girlfriend because that's why I applied to the program. And I was supposed to go there because that's where I met the people who are my life. And so you can kind of think like I was supposed to be in those classrooms because like the kids and I needed each other at that point. And and I happened to be the only one around. And so I like to believe that all of these things built and led me here in some sort of predestiny. But then I always think one decision changed everything about my life. And I did
Maybe
make that decision. Like I came to New York. That was one of the big ones that I wouldn't have done had I not met my girlfriend. But I do believe I was supposed to have moved here. Everything makes sense as soon as I moved here.
maybe it's a combination. Like maybe you have an optimal destiny that would serve you best, but you could choose to not follow it, you know?
Yeah, maybe it's like a Bridges thing, alternate universes. Like there is a me who never was a teacher, and there is a me who went to Berkeley, and there is a me who's mountain climbing somewhere.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I would like to believe it's both because otherwise I have wasted a lot of time and energy working way too hard for no reason. Like if it was just gonna all end up working well, and you would get to watch a TV show that says created by me, and I didn't have to do all the stuff I was doing. The tears, Andrea, the tears.
Then there's
The tears I could have saved.
it's funny we're talking about this, but then sometimes I also feel guilt when things do go my way. Like I'm like I worked hard for this. I got an opportunity that's I feel really grateful to have. Why did I get it? and then in some other country there's a war. So sometimes, while I do believe you can shape your destiny, and sometimes I feel like guilt for having not that I feel I have the best destiny right now. There's still a lot I want to achieve. But whenever I do achieve a goal, there's also this like other part of me that feels guilt over it. I'm like, but why did I get this and somebody else lives in a poor country? Like, so there's that too.
Well, I mean, I think that is a slippery slope. And
Yeah.
sometimes I have to turn off my New York Times notifications
Yeah.
because it's so dichotomous. Like the disparity is so bad between us and even other people in our country, that it is hard to be happy for things that seem frivolous. Like they may be the most important thing to us, but like to a regular person with a family and like, a traditional experience in the world, like us getting stage time
Yeah.
is meaningless.
Yeah. It's like, I just want to eat today. Like, I don't give a about that. That is some privilege right there. Like,
Exactly. Like,
I just want to know, can I take can I wipe my and bathe today, and can I eat something? And for some people that's like their biggest goal, and for a very good reason of survival. So yeah, it is. I feel really crazy and fortunate that I even have the privilege of setting goals.
and to worry about the things that we worry about.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm like, I can't find the drag performer that's available this week. And I will stress over like booking a wonderful drag queen for weeks. Like, what, Kristina? What is like sometimes I wake up and I'm like, what is my life? Like, yeah, I have to clean up wax off of this stage after the burlesque performance. Like, whatever it is, you're just like, what are we doing right now? And I enjoy it. It's crazy. Sometimes I feel like this is what I deserve. I worked very hard for it. And so I'm glad. But I do still work in schools. And so it is really hard to have something go really well that, again, is like artistic or creative. So it feels more frivolous. And we believe that's not the case, obviously, but
Yeah.
other people don't. And then I go to the environments that my students are in, and then I'm like, oh, this is different. Like, you forgot for a second what you were doing in New York. And that makes me change my comedy almost every time when I go back and I'm reminded of like even the life that I was living 5 years ago, or 7 or 9 or 15, 20 years ago. All of them were such different versions of still privilege. But the amount of privilege I get to benefit from now, I'm very, very grateful for. And that's why I enjoy doing our show at Stonewall, because we're able to book, mostly LGBTQIA women and people of color, and really try and give voices to other people who didn't have voices raising them that looked like them, and sounded like them. And so it helps to know that while I'm trying to do what I'm doing, I can also give space for other people to do their own thing beside me.
Right.
So anytime I can help, I try to, and I don't always know what that looks like. And sometimes it feels and looks different. But what I do know is that this is easier when we are all working together, even if our goals are different, like when there's compassion. And I think that comes back to, I guess, the theme of the call. Like living with passion helps other people live with passion. And that is maybe the best thing we can give people.
Right. I agree with a lot of that. Okay, so we're going to end there on a positive note. That was a beautiful sentiment right there. So before we end this podcast, is there anything you want to tell the audience about where they can find your show? If they live in the New York City area, if you have a podcast of your own, anything like that, you can share that.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on any platform at KKN, as in the letter N, the city. So KKN, the city. I didn't think about how hard that would be to communicate when I made it. But if you find me, I'll be on all platforms. My production company is dumpsterfire.productions on Instagram. We do shows every first Monday at Stonewall at 7 p.m., 6 p.m., 7 p.m. Our show is at 5 this Saturday, 7 p.m. every first Monday at 7 p.m. at Stonewall. But we try and do different performance acts and comedians with that. We give people longer time. We pay our comedians. We try and do things well for people. And if you go to my Instagram, it has my website, which will have all my show dates because I do travel out of the New York area for shows when I can. So if you're not in New York and you don't like gay bars, I'll be at a different sort of place near you soon.
I'll keep a lookout if you ever come to Philly, if you ever do shows in Philly.
Oh, I would love to. I love the Magic Garden.
Do
you know
I'm new in Philly. I've only been here for 6 months. I'm from New Jersey, so I actually don't even know what that is.
Okay, I'm going to message you, and then when I come, this is where we will go.
Okay.
You will love it.
That sounds good. All right. So for the listeners, I'll include a link to her Instagram below so you can access all of that much easier. And that's it. Pranzata Podcast, episode 123. Please don't forget to hit subscribe if you enjoyed what you heard today to help me grow this channel. And that's it. Have a good day, guys. Bye.